This is Out of Bounds. If it's happening in the world of golf, we're talking about it. Coverage, debate, discussion, pro golf and local golf. Let's do it. This is Out of Bounds. And here are your hosts, Nate Sharman and Josh Durso.
All right, welcome back to the Out of Bounds podcast. Josh Durso and Nate Sharman here with you as we head south to Florida, PGA National for the Cognizant Classic. We have a lot to get to today. Jacob Bridgeman got his first win on the PGA Tour this past weekend. Scottie Scheffler's top 10 streak, that came to a close. And news now that Jon Rahm, maybe his status on the next Ryder Cup team in question. Nate, a lot to talk about there, a lot to get to. But first, let's talk Genesis. Walk us through what happened.
Yeah, Jacob Bridgeman gets it done, gets his first win on tour. A little bit of a shaky ending for Bridgeman as he had to come down the stretch with a lot of pressure there, but he gets it done. The 26-year-old, and is only his 66th start on the PGA Tour. He's younger than Ludwig Aberg, and he's won on the PGA Tour, and not just won any event, he won an Elevate event. It's pretty incredible.
Huge stakes, because that takes a guy who a week earlier, everyone was like, who is this? We've never seen him before out at Pebble Beach. And now, he's essentially in the golf world a household name, and you'll be seeing a lot of them the next 2 years in these elevated events.
Yeah, he putted the ball extremely well, right? Led the field in strokes gained putting, and that's kind of what you need to do in these big time events, right? And down the stretch, I think on 17 and 18, he made big pressure 4 or 5 footers to get that victory, right? He came into the day, I believe, with a 6-shot lead over Rory McIlroy. Then Kurk Kitayama throws down that 64. You got Rory McIlroy, 4-time major champion in your group, right? You could struggle a little bit. He shoots 1 over par, 72, I believe, and then he just kind of leaks some oil towards the end, but he gets to the finish, and Jacob Bridgeman, winner on the PGA Tour.
He held on. If the tournament were 1 or 2 holes longer, maybe he wouldn't have.
We found out that if we found out these last few weeks, if golf tournaments were 5 holes longer merely, I think Scottie Scheffler would win every single one of them, right?
That too. Or if the first round just didn't count. It was really, really interesting watching Bridgeman come down the stretch. Like you said, he stumbled, but he didn't fall. He holds on. Things got really shaky there. For me personally watching, it was like right around walking off the 16th green where I felt like things were, the wheels were most wobbly, so to speak. But you know what? He held it together, and he made a couple really good saves on the last 2 holes, a couple putts that were not gimmies by any stretch. And, he gets that win. And like I said, this is a career-altering event for a guy like Bridgeman, because now he goes from not necessarily a household name to fast forward 3-4 months, you will have seen him in so many elevated events that he will be a household name. And that's just sort of how the signature to non-signature event structure, that's how it works, and that's how it yields stars.
Yeah, and if you get ready to learn the name Jacob Bridgeman, right? Because winning this event, he gets status in elevated events and everything for 2 years, right? And so you're just gonna continue to see a guy like Jacob Bridgeman, and I think a guy like him who puts the ball so well is going to be around for so long. Josh, I heard this comp, right? And I think it's really good in terms of a guy like Jacob Bridgeman could have a very much so a Lucas Glover career, right? Yep. A guy who's been on the tour for a long time. Lucas Glover has a crazy amount of wins. He has 6 wins, and I wouldn't be surprised if Jacob Bridgeman, maybe not 6, but picks up a few more throughout his time on tour. But more importantly, that longevity, right? Lucas Glover is 45 years old. Keep playing in PGA Tour events, rack up a lot of earnings, and just keep going. It's pretty impressive.
Yeah, definitely. It's proof that you don't have to necessarily be a star to etch something out that is memorable in the golf community.
66 wins is really impressive, though. Wow.
Yeah.
66 starts, excuse me. I don't know why I said that.
Yeah, it's a quick turnaround, and sort of the opposite, I feel like, of what we've seen lately with other guys, sometimes 80, 90, 100, 130 starts before getting that win. Let's talk about some of the other storylines that came from the Genesis. Rory, he keeps knocking. He's getting close, but he can't quite get it done. He definitely didn't putt as well as we'd expect, especially on Sunday. What'd you make of his performance?
Yeah, he seemed like he played pretty good on Sunday, right? He came in the day 6 shots back, so he's got to put down a low round, right, if he wants any chance to win this golf tournament. And just nothing went in for him all day. And then poetically on 18, he knocks in, a 50, 60 footer, right? And that's just all you can do is laugh at that point, right? And just like, wow, that's just kind of the encapsulation of what golf is, right? And I think that's so funny. And luckily for Jacob Bridgman, Rory wasn't making more putts because he certainly was ball striking his way around the golf course on Sunday and had a lot of opportunities to put some more fire on Bridgman right in that final pairing. So definitely fun. He's fun to watch when he's got that ball striking going, but just couldn't get the putter warmed up.
Yeah, he had a ton of makeable putts, especially in the first 2/3 of the round. Things kind of calmed down after that. But another impressive performance, Kurk Kitayama shot a 64, started the day 9 back. If you just turned it on around 5:30 or so on Sunday, you'd have thought that he was really, really, really in contention, although it was definitely going to be a stretch for him to force a playoff. Couple weeks in a row now that he's been in the mix. Is he somebody that we should be watching now?
Yeah, possibly, right? He's playing his best golf right now, and I believe he won the API or he won in Florida a couple years ago, so we'll see, right?
Yeah.
We're coming up on it.
Yeah, another one here, Adam Scott shot 63 on Sunday, finishes 4th on a sponsor's exemption. Adam Scott is one of those guys, we're going to talk about him a little later. I'm going to talk about him a little later on in the show. Let me tell you, we got to put some respect on these guys that are in their 40s because, so often I'm looking through the odds on Tuesday or Wednesday before an event, and I'm seeing guys like Adam Scott just sitting in the bottom third of odds. Experience matters so much in the PGA Tour. And guys like he and now Justin Rose, obviously less so Rose because Rose has been on a heater now for a year and a half. But, I can think back to the 2024 season when that was the story with him. He was falling in the bottom half of odds every week in and week out, and people were wondering if it was over for him. And now, he's one of the 5-6 best players in the world right in this very moment. So, Adam Scott's one of those guys that I think everybody should be watching pretty darn carefully because he is peaking at the right time. We're heading into major season. We're about a month away from Augusta. After watching him this past week, I feel like he's a guy that should be on everybody's radar.
Yeah, all things agree there, Josh. And, last night in the TGL, right, he gets it going. He gets the ball speed up to 189 miles per hour for the old elder statesman, right? It's pretty damn impressive, right, to see Adam Scott still shipping it off the tee at his age.
Yeah, and it's funny
he's only gained ball speed.
Yeah, and it's the same story with Justin Rose too. The technology and the prep that these guys are able to put in has improved so much since the start of their careers that it's almost not even an apples to apples comparison anymore. The experience these guys are having now in their 40s is so much better than the experience they had in the start of their careers in their 20s because of all the advances that have happened. It makes things like this entirely possible. But maybe the biggest storyline that wasn't Jacob Bridgman this past weekend was Scottie Scheffler. Finishes T12, ended that top 10 streak. He was in last place after Thursday. You and I were both texting on Friday, wondering if he was even going to make the cut. What do you think?
It's just unbelievable. Scottie Scheffler I believe he was 5 over through 10 holes on Thursday, right? And I think that he had to finish up his round on Friday morning when they had that long rain delay on Thursday. I thought he was going to be in the top 10, right? Josh, on 18 on Sunday, he had a makeable birdie putt. He had an uphill birdie putt. He just barely missed it. Actually put a pretty good putt on it. And then he sneaks out of the top 10, finishes top 12, right? And so that streak of 18 or 19, if you count the hero, 18 of made top 10 cut streaks comes to an end, right? And, I wouldn't be shocked if next week we see Scottie Scheffler start a completely new one, right?
Yeah, it's interesting because one of the things that I was thinking about watching this past week, because now it's I would say Scottie Scheffler's last 3 starts have been pretty slow. We'll call them slow or bad, whatever you want to do.
Since he's won, right? 2.
Yeah. But, this feels a lot like his putting woes. If you rewind, go back maybe 3 years or so, everyone was saying, boy, if he could ever just figure out how to putt a little better, if he could just figure out how to, and what happened? He figured out how to putt better and off he went. And it's been Scottie Scheffler's PGA Tour and so too golf ever since. This feels pretty similar to me. This feels like one of those situations where, it looks like this is just something that's really like a mental hitch. He could thrash it next week or in 2 weeks and put it behind him, and he could go on a tear just like he has been playing over the last couple seasons. So I don't know. It feels like it could just be like a light switch flipping. Maybe we see that.
Yeah, what's shocking to me is I don't have the exact stat behind this, but just from me thinking, when the last time is that Scottie Scheffler lost strokes up on approach, right? And, he lost it this week at the Genesis. He's negative point one, negative 0.1, so it's not much lost, but still to see that negative number next to Scottie and not be putting in the last couple of years. I mean, he's been an incredible putter the last year and a half, right? Ever since he switched putters, but still. Scottie Scheffler not going to lose strokes approach very long. I would expect him to mitigate that and just have some time off will help him a lot because these guys have played a lot of golf these last few weeks.
Yeah, and I would assume we're going to see some changes. We might see some changes to how he's approaching this. But one thing that I have to get off my chest here. Lots of chatter and lots of talk about the cut streak and Scottie Scheffler's cut streak remaining intact. We need to stop talking about cut streaks. Cut streaks are irrelevant in this version of the PGA Tour. We have 7 events all season that have a cut, like 7 elevated events. You're counting majors. You've got the 3-player events. So you've got Bay Hill, you've got Jack's tournament, you've got Tiger's tournament. They aren't traditional cuts like, full field events. Are you tired of hearing about it? Because that's the one thing that just feels like it has zero credibility to talk about a cut streak in this version of the PGA Tour.
I don't know if I'm tired of it. I think it's really fun to talk about it because Tiger just has that astronomical number. That just reminds you of how much Tiger's dominance was. And it was a lot of fun to talk about Xander, right? Obviously, it came to an end about a month ago now, right? But it's not something I think that should be talked about a lot, but it's still one of those cool big Tiger stats that we can talk about and remember him about how incredible he was.
Yeah. It's interesting. It just feels like the tour is such a different place today than it was when Tiger was doing it. It's one of the reasons why, even if a player got within striking distance of Tiger's record, I'm not really even sure it could be compared adequately, right? Like that, to me, it just doesn't even feel like a fair comparison because he did it in full field events with traditional cuts. He's competing against 125 to 140 players every week. Like that's, to me, that's just not really the right place to be making that comparison. And I also think I think it's fodder for the anti-PGA Tour folks who like to get on social media and, hammer them the way that a lot of people hammer live and the way they gloat about certain things that, just don't really pass the logical sniff test.
Tiger teased and he might play in the Masters. He continues to do it, right? He did it at the Genesis press conference. Then he did it on Sunday when he was on the broadcast on CBS. He hasn't ruled out playing in the Masters, which I think is just asinine, right? I think he'll play in a Champions Tour event before he plays in the Masters, but he knows Augusta obviously really super well, right? Played there so many times and has won there a bunch of times, right? But I just don't see how we can play in the Masters, but he hasn't ruled it out yet, so it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, I don't see it this year, maybe next year.
Yeah, I agreed.
And I think we talked about it last week, or maybe you and I talked about it offline, but the golf finally feels like it's in a place that it can survive without the Tiger chatter. Like, I don't think professional golf needs Tiger Woods the way it did just a couple of years ago. Honestly, I've really enjoyed, as a consumer of professional golf, I've really enjoyed this version of Tiger where he is clearly embracing that role of elder statesman, acting like essentially a leader of the tour and of the players, while letting the play part of it, letting that excitement be built out by the younger guys, by the guys who are now entering and in their prime. I think in some ways, when Tiger plays and when Tiger is talking about playing, he starts to suck the air out of the room, and it takes away from the other really cool stories that are happening in golf week in and week out now.
Yeah, and I think that's worthy to say, right? That's doing good. I mean, look at the ratings. I mean, they had over 3 million, 3.2 million for Jacob Bridgman's win at the Genesis this week, which is pretty damn good. And that's with Tiger being there, obviously, but not playing. But I think professional golf's in a good place right now in terms of eyeballs on it, right?
Yeah, and I also say this, like,
very similar really number to last year with Ludwig. Sorry, I should have included that.
And that's the thing. You can look at ratings this entire season. You can look at ratings last year. They're going the right direction. People are watching. People are tuning into professional golf. It's just a straight up fact. But I thought one of the most refreshing things was seeing Tiger in the booth on Saturday for an hour with the CBS guys, just sort of talking about, the tour, the future, talking about a little bit about his play, but really it was pretty minor in the grand scheme of things compared to all the other topics they talked about. I think that's the version that that's the PGA Tour now.
Certainly. And I don't know if it was there or where they talked about the Ryder Cup, right? And, he's giving himself that Masters deadline, right? As that, I don't know if it's considered a soft deadline of if he's going to be the captain at Adair Manor in 27 or next, not Adair. Yeah, Adair Manor in 27 or not. So we'll see on that.
Yeah, it'd be interesting. That to me is one of those areas where he makes complete sense, but I think if he's going to do it, I think he's got to do it completely differently than anyone's ever done it before. And I think he's got to really think about, just because of the U.S. team's position in recent Ryder Cups, just not really being able to hold a candle to that Euro team and what they've built over there.
Got to bring a guy like Chris Goddard up this time, that's for sure.
Speaking of the World DP World Tour, let's talk a little bit about that. So the DP World Tour has granted conditional releases to several players. I'm not going to read through the whole list, but there's a bunch of them. Some pretty, say, middle of the road known commodities. From the statement that was released by the DP World Tour, it seems like they're just making case by case individual deals. But Jon Rahm is not one of them. So these guys that are in on conditional release, they're going to be able to participate in some DP World Tour events when conflicts don't exist with their existing live schedule. It seems like a pretty good deal to me as far as, what I'd expect out of any of those types of deals. Before we get into the Rahm stuff, what do you make of the overall structure of the deal?
Yeah, it seems fair, right? I mean, these guys are going to pay fines, right, to get back on the DP World Tour. We saw Brooks Koepka pay a fine that amount, that charitable donation actually came out last week and talked about where that $5 million is going to be divvied up to. And it seems like Brooks Koepka has no problem with that. And there's a lot of the tour also has no problem with Brooks Koepka paying that fine and having to pay other fines in other ways too, right, to get back on tour. So it's good to see that we're going to find a resolution. I mean, it sounds like we haven't found a resolution for everybody quite yet, but we're getting there, right?
Yeah, it's interesting because this one's more interesting to me, I think, than the Brooks deal, because this creates a pathway for guys to be playing in both, right, in Live and the DP World Tour, and I think that's important. I also think it benefits the PGA Tour a bit because it gives them a little bit of separation. They're not the ones making deals. You got players that are going to be sort of creating their own path to being able to participate in other events. And hey, one of the things that I've come around on recently with regard to Live, I think that Live and the DP World Tour really have to almost be walking in lockstep together if, Live is going to survive long term, because they're never going to be able to compete with the PGA Tour in terms of exposure. And whether that's because it leans entirely into being a US based thing and not pushing the global side of things like Live fans like to mention and talk about, or whether it's just because of the major sponsor dollars that are invested into the PGA Tour. To me, this is the only way that Live can really find its footing long term, as if it is working with the DP World Tour directly. That said, not everybody is in on this new deal. Jon Rahm apparently turned it down. Not entirely clear whether it was because he didn't want to pay the fines or whether he just didn't quite agree with what the arrangement was or how it was proposed. What do you make of his position and all this?
Yeah, if it's because he didn't want to pay the fines and it's greedy, right? Jon Rahm talked about how he doesn't play golf for the money before he went to Live, and then he went to Live, and so things change quickly, right? But I think Jon Rahm, at the end of the day, he can kind of fall into this sort of Brooks category, right, where he's not going to FOD into a large sort of solution, right? He's going to have the player returning program. He's going to have the Jon Rahm returning program, right, where because he's Jon Rahm, because he's a major champion, because he's a prestige player, right, he's going to get a special exemption on how he gets his way back to the PGA Tour, and it's going to be kind of interesting how that happens, right? And when that happens. So I think the more I think about this, Jon Rahm doesn't need to say, I'm going to pay the fines back right now, right? He can keep waiting. He can afford to play the long game with PGA Tour because eventually the dam's going to break, right? We need Jon Rahm back, and how are we going to do it? Eventually.
Yeah, to me, I don't get it because this would have been an easy way. Obviously, the fines and such that he faces over with the DP World Tour cannot be anywhere near the fines that he will ultimately have to repay with the PGA Tour, right? That's just an assumption. I'm not sure what the numbers are, but that's just my assumption of
I don't
things.
know the numbers either.
I just don't understand what he gains from choosing like this hill to die on. But what is it?
Yeah, the only thing I can think of is that he's Jon Rahm and he's gonna figure this out by himself, right? He's not going to be shoehorned into a deal with a bunch of other players, right? You know,
Yeah.
I talked about the prestige that Jon Rahm has and the name recognition, the brand recognition, right? The former major champion. He's going to be able to make his way back to the PGA Tour, and we see what the PGA Tour, the decisions they're making, how they're a for-profit tour now. Maybe things will change for him in a few years, right?
Yeah, I guess, but I think the more pressing matter right now is, can Jon Rahm, by the rules, get his way onto the Ryder Cup? If he does
that's
not,
gonna be an interesting one.
I mean, if he does not work with, within the confines of some kind of an arrangement with the DP World Tour or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
That said, I think, if he plays well in majors, maybe wins a major, probably puts all of it to rest, right? Like,
Right.
the Bryson approach.
Yeah, it's going to
Bryson,
be really interesting to see
yeah,
if he's left off that Ryder Cup team. I don't see a scenario where Jon Rahm isn't in a Darren Matter in 2027. We're a year and a half away at this point. It is scary to see that it could jeopardize his position on the Ryder Cup team, but I think it would take a lot for that to actually happen, right?
Yeah, I agree. It is time for bag check. So let's get into this. We're talking putters. A little lesson in putting today. So the theme so far in these bag checks has been leaning away from the marketing that we see in TV and we're bombarded with on social media, especially if you follow some golf accounts. It's like if you follow one or two golf channels on Instagram or YouTube or anywhere, you just get crushed with golf marketing 24/7. But something that's come out of the last few weeks is this idea that really, like, when it comes to putting, and if you're in a little bit of a slump, sometimes all you need to is just look down at something different. And we talked a little bit about it last week. 2 weeks ago, Colin Morikawa, when he won, he did it with a Spider prototype that he actually picked up from Kurk Kitayama, which it's interesting. To me, it's interesting to think of professional golfers kind of like swapping equipment the way, Sunday weekenders do at their own local club. But Colin Morikawa, his putting had struggled mightily the last 2 years. And really, it was one of the big reasons why we thought that he just wasn't, keeping pace with what his world golf ranking was or sort of the stature that he had built up on tour through his play historically. But he makes the switch and everything turns around. And it's interesting because on one hand, you can look at this as like he's a tailor-made guy. Why didn't, he switched to a Spider prototype? Like, why had he not switched to a Spider prototype before? But then I got thinking about it. And this kind of goes back to the theme of sometimes you just need to try something different. Sometimes it doesn't even matter what it is. You just need to, like, if you're in a putting slump, you just need to pick up something new, get over the golf ball and see something different down there. Maybe it's a different head shape. Maybe it's a different shaft position. Maybe it's just something that looks ever so slightly different or the weighting feels slightly different. That can work. And the reason why I think that's such an important lesson to be learned is because, we all know plenty of guys who through the course of a season will buy 2 or 3 putters and they're selling them to their buddies because they don't like them after a few weeks or a month, or they're talking about buying another putter. And with golf equipment being as expensive as it is, I think one of the big takeaways that your weekender could have from this situation is just try another putter. Most guys who play golf, especially if you play golf frequently enough to be listening to a podcast like this, you probably have a spare putter or 2 or 12 in the basement or in the trunk. If you're in a putting funk, just grab one and play with it on the putting green for a while. Maybe not take it out in a round where you're playing for some money with your buddies, but maybe just tinker with it a little bit. Look at something different down next to the golf ball, and it probably will have as much or a better outcome on your putting as would going out and buying a new putter altogether. And hey, it'll save you $300 or $400 in the process, because that's what putters cost now. So that's it. It's interesting because I've lived that 1,000 times. I've got a couple putters in the back of my truck that I turn to when my regular putter isn't feeling quite right. A lot of times I won't even actually take that secondary or third putter out onto the golf course. I'll literally just practice with it a little bit and then go back to my regular putter, and boom, it's like a again, light switch in the brain, and all of a sudden we're putting good again. But something to think about as we head into the spring, because I know a lot of folks out there, especially here in the Northeast, you're getting the golf itch. You're thinking about, what am I going to have in the bag in another month and a half when I'm able to get out there? Maybe look at some of the stuff you have in your rotation that isn't necessarily in your bag every week to test things out. Also, fun fact, a spider putter has now been in the winner's bag 5 out of the last 6 weeks.
Yeah, it's wild.
Crazy.
Yeah, how sad is it that we're potentially seeing the death of the blade putter on tour?
You hate it. You also, okay, can we talk for a second about the fact that you are, generally speaking, an anti-spider putter guy?
Well, I just like the look of the blade putter a little better. I don't like the look of a spaceship when I'm looking down, right? You know, I think I like the smaller putter. It's just the death of the Brooks putter, I think, or the death of Brooks putter. I'm going to talk about Brooks. That's why I said that. The death of the blade putter, I think, is because of Brooks, right? And a guy who's been a very consistent putter with that blade putter for so many years. He's officially switched to a spider, and I think that marks the end of the blade putter, right?
It's interesting. Yeah, I'm with you. I think the data now shows it. For whatever reason, we're in a phase right now where the best players in the world are playing, as you just called it, space shuttles on the end of a shaft, as opposed to the Scottie Cameron blades that, dominated the PGA Tour for decades. So it's interesting. It's really interesting.
I like what you said about having a lot of extra putters, right? I know you don't do it as much anymore, but you used to have a pro shop in the back of your car, right? And for me, I'm very similar. I use a putt I don't even own, right? And I use a putter that's owned by you, right? So that just goes to show how you just need to change it up sometimes. I like it.
Yeah, that putter's on permanent lease, by the way. I think I don't think it's ever going to come back to me. But it does.
You have one that's similar to it, so I think you're okay.
Yeah. It's one of those things where I think there's a lot of, it's gotten so much more expensive to try different things, different equipment. I remember back, I go back like 8 to 10 years ago when, brand new putters were like under $200. Now, you're not finding a new putter for under $200, and $200 is a lot of money. I want to just like acknowledge the privilege in that statement of like acting like a $200 putter is, not an investment. It is. I'm just saying, like, now most, flagship putters, from Odyssey, certainly from Scottie Cameron, from really any of the big manufacturers like Ping, TaylorMade, you're in the $300 to $400 range.
Yeah, at least, right? I think a lot of the new putters sometimes are $500. And I think you go into any Golf Galaxy or any sort of like that, and you're putting on the putting green in there, and like, oh, I like this putter. And then you look at the price tag, you're like, whoa, yeesh.
Yeah,
I don't like it anymore.
It's crazy. So it removes the ability to be able to sort of like try and tinker with different things, especially putters are so much different. There's so much more that goes into putters compared to different categories of irons, where I think the decision process is a little easier. But see what's around. See what's
then you
around.
missed 6 foot and helicoptered into the.
Yep. All right. Let's get into this coming week. We are now one day away from the Cognizant Classic at PGA National. We're kind of in the entry point here of the Florida swing. This is typically a low scoring. I say low scoring. I mean, scores are typically higher. Not as, we're not going to get those birdie fests. This is typically a lower scoring event. You got the famous bear trap, of course, holes 15 through 17. Typically, this favors ball strikers. What are you watching for?
Yeah, I think Dan Rappaport had a great tweet where he was talking about sort of the conditions of so far on the PGA Tour, and the average winning score has been about 20 under. So I'm excited to get a little bit, like you said, lower scores or higher scores, right, to sort of get that. But then you look at the field, Josh, and 0 of the top 25 in OWGR in the field.
Yeah.
And Jacob
Yeah.
Bridgeman was scheduled to be in the field, WD. Michael Kim, I believe, WD too. There's a few others. And then we ended up with 0 of the top 25. It's so bad, I think, that Ryan Gerard is your favorite. And I think he's been going back and forth with Shane Lowry all week, Josh. And it's hard. I know, for a golf fan like me, I think this is interesting, right? But just looking at the board, right, you get Ryan Gerard at 19-1, a guy who's never won on the PGA Tour, right? And, I think that's really interesting, right? But looking at Shane Lowry, Josh, a guy like Shane Lowry, he's played 200 starts on the PGA Tour. He's been a pro on tour for 10 years, right? He's played a lot of DP World Tour starts, right? A lot of European Tour starts. And so you got to remember that a major champion, though, a guy that won the Open Championship, right? How many PGA Tour wins do you think Shane Lowry has? This number will shock you if you don't already know.
Oh, gosh. He has got to have something like, to me, he's a guy who has a lot of, in my mind, he has a lot of career wins, but my assumption is that my brain is vastly overestimating her. I'm going to guess that he has something like 7 wins.
Oh,
7
not even
feels
close.
like the right number.
No, he has 3 PGA Tour wins.
See, that's
one of them was at the Zurich where he played with Rory McIlroy, and that's a team event, right? So I think that's worth like a half or maybe even less. He's playing with Rory McIlroy, so he's got 2.5 wins, right? And that Zurich was in 2024. He won the Open Championship in 2019, Josh. So he just hasn't really won that much. A guy like Shane Lowry, though, he's one of the favorites on tour, right? Just has that attitude where he's a really fun guy. You'd love to go have a pint with him over in Europe somewhere. It's just a guy that you would love to hang out with. But it's just crazy to me. He's only won 3 times on the PGA Tour.
Yeah, and it's interesting. He's obviously younger than Justin Rose, younger than Adam Scott, but I kind of put him in that same category almost. But in reality, he's probably more like a journeyman than he is like an actual legacy name in the game of golf.
Yeah, and he only has 200 starts on the PGA Tour. That's one thing you have to really reiterate, right? He doesn't have a ton of starts, so he's only got a little over 200. So, and he's only 38. So he's probably got another. We just talked about how these old guys are really figuring out towards the end of their career. So he's got another 7, 8, 10 years at least, right? Yeah. I think his game's going to really translate too. He's got a nice swing, and he has a good short game too. So I think there's still some wins left in the tank for Shane Lowry, but it's still astounding to see that in 2026 he has 3 PGA Tour victories.
It's also funny because we were talking earlier about this elevated, non-elevated structure. He's one of those guys who, if he wins a single signature event at any point in the next 2 years, his all of the numbers that we just talked about could be completely flipped on their head because he could rattle off 3 or 4 or 5 wins in the subsequent years that follow that, and all of a sudden we'd be talking about his career in a completely different way.
Yeah, and I think we're always going to talk about Shane Lowry in a really positive light, right? He won that major championship, and that's ultimately, I think, the biggest describer, right? He's always going to be a major champion, and it's really going to be a guy that's won over $30 million on tour in those 200 starts. So it's definitely interesting. He's got a really good career, but it's just crazy to think he's only had 3 wins, and the 1 win in the last 6 years is a team win. Yeah. Not even a full score win in a not huge field, right? A lot of the big players play in it, but still interesting to hear.
Yeah, it's shocking. It is actually pretty shocking when you think about how much of a household name he is in the golf world.
3 PGA Tour wins. I think a lot of guys have 3 PGA Tour wins. I mean, you look at some of the young guys even have that. I believe Akshay Bhatia has 3 wins.
Yeah. It's very interesting. So let's get into what we're thinking for this coming week. Do you have a winner pick? It's tough.
Yeah, like I mentioned, 0 to the top 25. So that the odds board is really, really hard to pick right at the top. A guy with not a lot of prestige is going to be around 20-1, right? So I think this is a week where you're gonna find value a lot down the board, right? Because I think in a week like this, anyone can really win. It's a scenario where you don't have a guy like Scottie Scheffler lapping the field at the top, or Rory McIlroy, right? So you got to kind of find your spots. But, I'm still looking at the top of the leaderboard still, that's for sure. And I think a guy like Nicolai Højgaard and one of those Højgaard twins is going to possibly get it done. They're both ripping for a win, right? They haven't won yet, either of them on the PGA Tour. They've both played well. I look at Nicolai a little bit more than Rasmus this week. Nicolai was T3 at the Waste Management, T22 at the Farmers, played decent with a top 20 here last year at the Cognizant Classic. So give me Nicolai Højgaard, and I'm going to get that wrong. The other Højgaard twin's going to win. That's what seems like what happens when I pick them both, when I pick either one of them.
Give me Davis Thompson, 33-1.
I like it.
Or thereabouts. Like we were talking about the other day, this week is kind of who knows what's going to happen. Brooks Koepka in the field. He didn't look very good the last time he played, but maybe he's going to show some signs of life. This would be an interesting week for a guy like him to contend because there aren't really any other big names in the field, other than like a Shane Lowry that we talked about, or the Horgard twins. Will Zalatoris, that's another one. That's a name that we're expecting to see something from here, but we really aren't. What about a long shot though? Do you have a long shot pick for me?
I first want to correct myself. Actually, but he has 2 wins, not 3. But but that was going to give one of my long shots away, right? I keep doing that today. But Tom Kim, a guy who has 3 PGA Tour wins, he's at 68-1. I think he's going to play well this week. I think he needs to kind of find his way into those elevated events, right? Not necessarily qualified for all of those. And then my other long shot's a big one at 165-1. Josh, a PGA Tour winner, a guy that played well here last year and has played okay this year, Andrew Putnam. 65-1. Andrew Putnam miscut at the Farmers, but he's T2 at the Amex. He played decent here last year, T11, like I said. I think Andrew Putnam might not win this event, but I think he's a really good player in terms of DraftKings lineups, right? I think it could be good. For 65-1, how can you not play that number, right?
I got one for you. Adam Hadwin. That's my long shot pick.
Where's he?
Basically down at the bottom of the board, 100-1.
Okay, so, I can get around that.
That's it. This is one of those weeks where I start to ask myself, isn't everyone a long shot pick?
Yeah, really is.
Right? Like, isn't basically everybody in the field a long shot? Because you wouldn't have, if you had these guys in the field in any other event with even a handful of, top 25 guys, you wouldn't pick any of them.
Right.
That's
what I'm just saying about the top of the board being so saturated, right? You get like Ryan Gerard, a young player on tour, 19-1. And I just think even the odd makers, I think, are a little bit, I don't know if confused is the right word, but just kind of interested where to place these guys, right? Because I believe it's one of those weeks where literally everybody on the odds board can win. I don't think there's very many guys. Maybe Danny Willett can't win, but I don't think there's very many guys on the odds board that can't win this week, despite their number, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. It is interesting for sure. Somebody could make a whole lot of money if they happen to pick that lottery, right?
Right.
All right.
It's a lottery. It's truly a lottery ticket.
Time for our weekly trip here of me giving you 3 guys and you having to choose who's going to be the top finisher out of them. So not to win. This is not a who's going to win. This is a who's going to have the best finish out of these 3 players. Gary Woodland, Billy Horschel, or Eric Cole.
Ooh, Eric Cole.
They're all,
Billy Ho is really interesting.
Watching. They're all in the, say, 55 to 60-1 range.
Billy Ho is really interesting because, he was lighting the world on fire and playing pretty good too. And then he had that injury, right? And he's fighting his way back from that. He's a TGL superstar, one that comes near and dear to my heart, right? Watching TGL, right? So I'm going to go with Billy Ho. Why not? I like it.
I thought for sure that you were going to go with Eric Cole.
I do like Eric Cole. I wish he wouldn't wear those flood joggers that he wears, but that's okay.
Well, we'll see how this plays out. I'm actually going with Eric Cole. So next week on the show, we'll do a little back and forth here and see who is going to come out on this one on top. Obviously, we don't have much faith in Gary Woodland.
Gary Woodland, what a cool story. The guy that's came back from, everything that he's went through, right? Went through cancer a couple of years ago and has come back. He's a really cool story in the PGA Tour and a guy that's starting to figure it out too. He's starting to play better.
Yeah.
Former major champion.
Yeah. You can't take that away
Pebble
from him.
Beach. They're playing there this year, right?
Yeah, 2 years. Next year? I think that's next year, right? Yeah.
I think you're right.
No. So anyway, that is going to do it for this edition of the pod. If you want to see more, follow us over on TikTok. We're posting there in between episodes. And of course, it's an easy way to let us know what you're thinking. Hope everybody has a great weekend. And you know the drill. Whether it's down the middle or out of bounds, keep on swinging.